Mary Henderson, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I know there's a lot I want to talk about with you, but is there anything you want to say before I get going?
I want to say hi to everybody, and just great to be here, Ed.
All right. Well, I appreciate that because I like when guests lie. That's important. You gotta have fun on this, or it's not worth it for me. All right. So I checked you out, and I don't normally always go fully into it, but I started getting down the rabbit hole with you because of your personal branding and how you set up, how you have the whole wheel, you have everything. So let's go back in time a little bit and not talk about it right now. But how did you get to this point in your
A very interesting journey for me, Ed. In year 2000, I started my career in the IT sector. And back then, IT was the big thing. Everyone wanted to get into it. And I got this amazing opportunity to work for one of the largest IT distribution companies in the world. And the portfolio that I was looking after was basically a declining business in the business that I was working for, the company that I was working for. And my boss said to me on the first day, Mary, I've got great news and I've got bad news. The great news is you've got this amazing opportunity ahead of you. The bad news is you've got 8 weeks to fix it. And I was like, okay. So I go and see the client, and they were the largest retailer in Australia at the time. And they said, I went and I had a meeting with all the constituents, the stakeholders in the business, and the key stakeholder, the key decision maker, she didn't actually show up to the actual meeting. So I'm sitting in this boardroom with about, I don't know, 15 people, and I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing here? If the person that is supposed to make a decision is not sitting here, then how can I possibly move forward? To cut a long story short, I end up leaving. I walk into the lift. I was wearing red snakeskin boots. There was a woman that walked into the lift, and I knew that that was the person that didn't show up to my meeting. So as I'm standing in this lift, I could feel the daggers behind me, checking me out up and down, and hearing this deep voice. And she says, oh, I have to have those red snakeskin boots. So I looked at her and I said, are you such and such? And she said, yes. And I said, you didn't show up to my meeting. And she said, well, that's because we're going to pull our business away from your company, and it's not worth me being there. So I said, are you going downstairs to have lunch? She said, yes. And I said, okay. So we go downstairs. She agreed to have a 5-minute coffee with me. And in that moment, she just looked at me and she said, what do you need, Mary? Because there's the 3 people prior to you coming on board haven't been able to fix this problem. And I said, if you give me 12 weeks to fix this problem, I need to sit with your operations team, figure out, I need to reverse engineer the problem and match that problem with our organization. If you give me that, I can fix this problem. And she said, you've got 12 weeks. You don't fix it in 12 weeks, we take the business away from you. And it was in that moment, that very moment, Ed, that I realized I've got the greatest opportunity of a lifetime to build my brand as a complex problem solver in the IT industry, specifically in logistics. And I was going to build a brand around it. Now, let's keeping in mind that in year 2000, that's 22 years ago, who knew what personal branding was? It wasn't even a thing then. And I knew in that moment that I was going to build I was going to command my own demand. Basically, I knew exactly what I was going to do. So that moment onward, I became strategic and deliberate about this notion around personal branding. And to cut a long story short, again, I ended up fixing that problem. I turned that business from a declining 8 million to 22 million in 18 months. I then got headhunted by a major US multinational. And it was there where I had a major sales team, an Asia Pacific sales team. And I went ahead and removed job descriptions and job titles from my salespeople and converted every single one of them into a brand and matched who they were in their natural state of being to the type of portfolio that they were going to manage. And that's where it all started.
Wow, that's amazing. So you've been in Australia your whole life?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I assume you've been all over the world though.
Yes, I've traveled quite extensively. Yeah, it's been an amazing journey, but and eclectic as well. There's so
Right.
many different aspects of, the journey.
And I just was curious myself. That was something that popped in my head because you got the greatest accent. Um, and you're saying I do, I know California anyway. All right. So with that, all right. So at that point, you're like, you changed all this thing, you set up all these salespeople that have their own personal brand, but then it had to get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm tired of doing this for companies who don't really understand what I'm doing. And I know I might be putting words in your mouth, but as you can tell, I don't work corporate. It doesn't work for me. I was in the Navy. That was the closest I could get to that. And that didn't work for me. Got out and I've owned my own businesses and done my own, sole proprietor stuff and other stuff all the way. So when did you get to that point? Because that's in order to get, most people don't understand is you have to go the path in order to
Yes.
tell people that what they're doing is wrong and how you know this. So
In 2005, I left my corporate life to actually start my entrepreneurial journey. And it was in 2005 where I started my own software company. And I saw a really big opportunity in the academic space. There was a really big gap. And I, by the way, had no idea about software development. I just saw an opportunity and thought, okay, I'll just employ people to kind of figure out what I'm doing, because I really didn't know what I was doing. I had that business for 7 years. It turned over 7 figures year on year, and it was a good entry into entrepreneurship. It was not what I was meant to do for the rest of my life, but it was a very important part of the journey that I'm on right now. It's amazing. It's like Steve Jobs says, you figure out your life, and connect the dots working back to front. It's true. Because when I look at what I do now, that 7 years taught me how to design frameworks and methodologies. And that was because I had the most amazing team of computer scientists and also cognitive scientists that worked in my business that made me understand the power of frameworking, methodologies, reverse engineering, sorting out data, and understanding how to organize data so it makes sense to the end user. So that was that 7 years. And then in September of 2010, I actually resigned from my own company that I built because and literally it happened 3 hours after my son was born. I knew that in that moment that I just had to go and find what I was looking for. I had to go and find myself. And that was a 12-month sabbatical that I took off. Thankfully, I merged my company with another company. I did take 12 months off. I gave up a life that I had built around lifestyle, friends, keeping up with the Joneses. I completely walked away from all of that. And I wanted to take 12 months off to figure out, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? What is my purpose? What am I here for? Because this software company is not what I'm here for. And then I got a mentor who was a professor in philosophy at Oxford University, and he mentored me in that 12-month period. And it was in that 12-month period, Ed, where I actually figured out what my genius zone is and how I was going to glue it all together, which actually brought me to what I'm doing today.
wow. So philosophy major, huh?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. But the thing is that that's actually a critical part of the story, that the philosophical aspect is just such a necessary.
Yeah. I'm still stuck on the fact that you said keeping up with the Joneses. I thought that was an American thing. So, and I'm not.
No, we're using here too.
Because I'm like going, okay, everybody can relate to that. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems is we get into a job and then we get into a career and we're stuck there because we have the golden handcuffs, right? Basically, everything you're trying to take care of. And I always tell people, what are you willing to give up to get to what you really want? That's the
Yes,
question. What are you willing to give up? And a lot of times people aren't willing to give anything up. And so you'll never, because you got to risk something to get something.
I agree. Absolutely. I mean, I gave up everything, credit cards, you name it, friends, lifestyles, uh, memberships to things that didn't matter anymore. Until this day, Ed, I still don't have a credit card.
Wow. See, over here, you couldn't get a house without a credit card.
Yeah, I just can't. I can't. I don't want any of that debt. I just wanted to, you know, I wanted to make sure that I could actually live on my terms and create the lifestyle that I want. And it's interesting because when and you actually made a very good point. When you actually give up stuff, you make room for other stuff that matters. That actually does matter. The other thing that I gave up, which is important to mention, is we don't have a TV in our home. We haven't had a TV since 2011, and I have not watched the TV since 2011. I have no concept of what goes on a box. I don't know any actors, actresses, don't know any shows on Netflix, wouldn't have a clue. And that's the best thing I did, because my time is spent on nurturing my mind, and that's a very, very important asset to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing, because I know so many people who would never give up the TV. But,
No, never.
all right, so you did all this, and then you started your new company, right?
Yeah.
And what year did you start your new company? Your current one?
So 2015, I started my coaching business.
All right, so it's been about 7 years, right?
Yes.
Is what you said?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So now, how did you get? All right, so I'm going to do my coaching, right? Because I've seen your stuff. I looked at your pages. People are giving you great testimonials. People talked about you, which is and that's, you can tell people later that how important that is. But looking at your thing, how did you get that? How did you go from where you are? I'm going to be a coach, and how do I get my first client? And I'll get to my point in a second, but that for a lot of people to go from what they were doing to get to do this, how did they get that first one?
Well, the thing is that I just want to backtrack a little bit, and that is to say that the coaching business took me actually 3 years to develop before I launched it. So that was because I was building a system, and I was building a system that was going to be based on a series of frameworks that basically 100% took away the how-to. And that was very important to me. Now, given the fact that my background was the software company, we built a lot of frameworks, I understood how to do that. And also, I use a lot of technology in my business as well. So those 3 years was trying to figure out, how do I merge my understanding of personal branding, building systems, and also understanding sales in the way that I understood it. So if I could merge those three things together, could I solve a problem? And the answer is absolutely I could. But you see, and this is what a lot of people don't do. They say, I want to start a coaching business, and then they focus on the one thing, and it's just that one little tiny thing that they're selling. But in actual fact, you've got to look at the whole picture of who you are, your knowledge, wisdom, and skills, your internal inventory, which is your currency. And once you've unpacked that, then you can merge it all together and understand truly what the complex problem is that you can solve. So it took me 3 years to actually create that system before I then started to launch, my coaching business, if you will, in the marketplace.
Mary, before you keep going, I want to go back to it, because not everybody's going to understand framework, right?
Yes.
What you're talking about. Can you break that down in more of a layman terms for what people can understand?
It's a process. It's basically showing a client, for example, that if you do it like this, then this will happen. And it's a series of rules that you follow and implement. So frameworks is an implementation process. It's not consumption of knowledge. It's implementing so that something happens at the end of it. The client needs to experience a tangible outcome at the end of that framework before they can move forward. So, and that's my thing, Ed. You've got to get the client to keep moving towards the tangible outcome, which is the promise that you make. Otherwise, it's just another consumption of knowledge, and that's not what I want. So that's what essentially framework is.
Is that close to like when people have systems, they put systems in place, and like that? Basically, so in case someone doesn't understand framework, they understand systems, right?
A system is exactly the same process. A system has input, output, and a feedback loop. Okay, so it's exactly the same thing. You've got to allow for the implementation of information in order to be able to get feedback to make it better and faster and shinier and cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. So
I just want to make sure people understood what you were talking about.
You're absolutely right.
No, don't have to say that. Don't feed my ego. It's big enough as it is. Uh, all right, so let's talk about how you came up with all these different your the wheel, basically. What, I don't know what you call it. What do you
The
call it?
methodology. The methodology.
So how did you know? All right, so when you're thinking this up, did you go back with all the stuff you had done and said, okay, I do for this company, when I figured this out, this is how we did it? How did you come up with, because you spent 3 years doing this, so you had to really look at it. So walk me through that process.
Yeah. So there's three critical parts to what I can do. There's the personal branding, there's obviously building the systems, and then there's sales. So what I did is I looked at each one and I asked myself, well, how did I actually get myself from a nobody to a somebody in the IT industry? How did I create my own demand? And all I did was just literally just write out on a whiteboard all the steps that actually took place in a particular scenario. One scenario was the one that I just shared about, that first job that I got, and all of the things that I actually had to do in order for me to start creating my demand. Even things like planning my day, my tasks, my tasks and my daily tasks. The importance of that is unbelievable. A lot of people don't understand how important that is. But for me, that was a fundamental part of my success, because I knew every day that these were the things that I had to do in order for me to get me to that to the next step in my destination. And it just worked like a system. So it's similarly with building systems as well. It was understanding from my digital background, my software company, how did we actually break down data and group it together so that it makes sense to a client, or not a client, to the client's end user, more importantly. So it was data organization, understanding what I knew and how I could actually unpack that from a information standpoint. So once you've unpacked all the information based on all the areas that you know for sure, it makes it much easier to actually group together and make sense of it. That's the whole idea of data. It's just a whole bunch of stuff, and our job is to make sense of it. So how do you best make sense of it? You've got to categorize it. You've got to put it into categories, or in boxes, if you will, that makes sense to the person that needs that solution solved. It's not what I need. I'm actually building a system for somebody that needs that problem solved. And how do they think? What's going through their mind when they're actually experiencing, or when they're trying to actually figure out their brand, or they're trying to figure out the complex problem that they can solve? How do they want to experience my system so that they can actually see that they've got an outcome at the end of it? They're transforming at the end of each step of the way. And similarly with sales. So sales was a little bit more complex because there's so many different layers involved in sales. And this is the other thing, Ed. If there's lots of layers, each layer needs to be unpacked and systemized. Even if it's a micro system, it still needs to have a start point and an end point. And everything in between needs to be in sequential order to make it as easy as possible for the client. Because at the end of the day, what I'm looking for is providing the client or the prospect an ecstatic Mary Henderson brand experience. That's my ultimate goal in everything that I do. And that's the question I ask myself when I'm actually building, systems. Is this going to create an ecstatic brand experience at the end of the journey? Because if it doesn't, you won't get brand advocates. You will not. People will not actually talk about you and rave about you because the experience was mediocre. You want to give like ecstatic experiences so people can talk about it to 5, 10 other people.
Right. I totally agree. And what people don't realize also is, even though you do amazing for one person, they're only going to tell maybe max 10 people. You do horrible for one person, they're going to tell 20, and people
Yes.
forget that. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
And it's real. I mean, and as much great work you've done, it's really difficult for them to do a review for you. You know what I mean? It's so funny how and so putting systems in place, like we're talking about, our framework, whatever you want to call it. I see you've been adopting my word. I didn't mean to change your word. But having those things in place, because I want to go back to what you say about doing what you need to do for the day, right? Or your morning, whatever. Most people don't want to have that out. So they don't want to have it planned that much. They want to be free. And then but systematically or framework, whatever you want to call it, having those things in place, make sure that you do what you need to do. And same in my industry, we have a whole framework of what you're supposed to do every day of the week so that you are, productive and you do really amazing. And the problem is only 1% of us do that.
Exactly. And the thing is that if you're not strategic and deliberate, how do you predict your outcomes? I'm just asking you a question, because otherwise, you're right. You're being free and easy and, singing Kumbaya. That's all great, but that doesn't bring food on the table, does it? Not necessarily. And the thing is that this is the thing we've got to remember. You can't build your personal brand. You can only define your brand essence. The people in the outside world are building your brand, whether they're your followers, prospects, clients, they're building your brand. Okay. All we can do is just define our brand architecture, the essence, the heart of our brand, how we want people to perceive us. But that takes a lot of effort, Ed, and you're right. It does take a daily effort in terms of understanding the things that you must be doing every single day, not just to be seen and to be heard, but to actually work in your business and on your business as well. And I think that there's a really, really fuzzy line, I think, between what a planner is and what an actual strategic and deliberate plan is. So, each day I know exactly the 5-10 things I must do today. I just cannot not do them, because it moves me one step forward and closer towards my goal.
I totally agree. Because I used to do to-do lists, right? Then I found out that to-do list never gets done. But so you just start focusing on what you have to get done, what you need to
Yes.
get done that day. And that's all you write down and that's all you work on.
Yes.
And it's a huge difference. All right. So let's talk about now that fast forward. Now we're in your business because you already did the systems. You have that in place. So someone comes to you and they say, I need your help. Right. So you go through your personal brand architecture. You look at the brand essence. I'm reading your stuff here. I don't want to make a mistake. Brand story, brand value, brand proposition, and brand promise. You go through that first with them, I assume.
Absolutely. So we've actually built an entire technology around that. There's a whole SaaS platform that actually does the heavy lifting for the client. And the reason we do that, Ed, is because I want real truth data. I don't want to work with somebody that gives me all this stuff that's just complete made up nonsense. It's really, really difficult to work with somebody who doesn't have the depth and breadth of data. By data, I'm talking about knowledge, wisdom, skill set. That's very important. And that's the inventory that we need. The system will ask for that level of inventory, because when I can see what the client's core values are, what their story is, when I can understand all of those attributes, then I can actually help them create a really powerful brand foundation. The architecture becomes very, very powerful. And also, it needs to then be 100% congruent with all of the other moving parts. I can't create a content strategy or a sales strategy without that foundational piece, but it has to be truthful. It has to be honest. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So that's the first part of the process, is unpacking all of those attributes and understanding what a human actually looks like as a brand, how the outside world perceives that individual as a brand, looking at the tone and the voice. Of course, the brand story is critical, because that has to also be believable and trustable. And so when you get all of that right, then you've built a very solid foundation. This is the part that most people miss out. They go straight to lead generation and wonder why they can't attract sales. But if you don't get your branding right, you can't get your messaging right. It's as simple as that.
So what do you do after that?
So then after that, once we've got all of the inventory, then we look at designing a system. So we take all of the skill set, we take all of the knowledge base, and we start to organize all of the data. So so that we're now designing a solution to a complex problem. Now, the people that I work with are mostly 99% industry experts. So they might come from corporate, they might be PhDs, they've already accumulated 20, 30,000 hours in their area of specialization. They already know the problem that they can pretty much solve. And they also know who needs that problem solved. So we're never looking for a niche and chasing for a hungry niche. We already know who the client base is, and we also know the complex problem that they can solve. My job is to organize the data so that when they actually present the methodology and the system to their clients, it makes sense and it's supported with frameworks. It's supported with tools that makes their client's life as easy as possible. And there's a starting point and then there's the end point. And the end point has to be 100% tangible outcome. It must be. So that's what we do. We just design the entire process. And then that process converts into an online learning management system, an online program. But it also is then used for workshops or, corporate clients that don't want to necessarily do an online, be in an online environment. So once the program, let's call it the program, is established, that program never changes. It's how they deliver it changes. You can have an online course, you can have a workshop, you can you can serve corporates, but the actual methodology never changes. Okay, so that's part 2. Then part 3 is building the digital assets around that. So the digital asset is all public, mostly public facing. And it's things like website, building your sales funnel, the automation processes, lead magnets, all of the things that I would call the customer experience. And that's what the public facing really needs to be. You need to be able to provide prospects or future clients an ecstatic customer experience through any form of touch point. And then the final part is what I call the layered lead generation strategy, which is using social media. It's using other forms of media such as podcasts, referral partner programs, networking events. It's really understanding where your customer is and being in front of them in those environments. And again, creating strategic and deliberate solutions to be able to pull. This is all a pull strategy, pull your clients in so that you can start a dialogue. And of course, wrapped around that is the content strategy, because without messaging and without understanding how to write content that pulls people in, you ain't going to get anywhere. And so that's
most people fail at that.
Yes, Ed, they do. They really do. They want to just go, they just push and there's just spray information, and people don't want to be sprayed. What people want is they want a mature conversation. That's what they want.
Yeah. I mean, the problem in my industry, you see these young guys doing these stupid TikTok things, and it's like, you just made yourself so unprofessional that anybody who is such professional will not work with you just because of what you're doing. And it's like, you have to be, I don't care if you dress in a t-shirt, I don't care how you dress, but just don't act like an idiot. Excuse my language.
Yeah. I agree. I actually agree with that. And the thing is that we've got to put things in context. And I think this is what people forget, and that's why I'm saying that most people start at lead generation, which is why they do all those TikTok. It's just all about, it's vanity metrics does not put food on the table, period. It doesn't even build your brand. I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that, but I know from experience that I don't need 5 million likes. I just need the right people to like my content that potentially will become my clients. That's it. It's all I care about, and so that's my theory.
Well, no, you're right on that, because I mean, I have almost 30,000 on Instagram, but only probably 800 of them will ever deal with me. Right.
Yep.
That's the rule. And it's not like I'm out there boosting. It's just being around certain people. All of a sudden you get all these people start following you, and not that that's a great thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to get into the sandbox that you need to be into. And that could be a small sandbox. It doesn't have to be a huge sandbox, but it has to be your sandbox that you need to be into.
100%. 100%. I agree.
Yeah, too many people are so worried about getting content out. I mean, I was the worst at it. I didn't do any, and now I do way too much. Because I
I
do
think
this podcast, I do a Helping the Brave podcast for veterans once you take the uniform off. I do my radio, I do also lives from the radio and other stuff. But it's just to get that content out there because there's so much wrong information out there. I'm trying to bombard that with that other stuff. So I totally get what you're doing here. I applaud you for breaking it down and actually having a system or framework, whatever each person wants to use. And because you need it, you need to know what you've done is taking what we normally do for products for as a person, right? So
exactly.
yeah,
That's exactly right. And you're right. People buy from people. That's that bottom line.
yeah. And it doesn't matter. It's not the company. I mean, it is to a certain point, but most of the time it's the person. Because you can, if there's 5 companies that kind of sell the same thing, they're going to go with the person that they deal with, not the company, because it's usually the same. But if it's a unique product and you don't have a choice, you're going to still stick with that company, even if you don't like the person. But all right, so you've done all this. I've seen you do other stuff on there. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we go?
No, I think that my message has always been, Ed, that without understanding who you are as a brand, it's very, very, very difficult to generate leads. It's very difficult to pull in the right tribe that you want to build a relationship with. It really is. There's a real disconnect. And I think that we've got to all come back to that starting point and really ask ourselves, well, how do I want to be perceived from the outside in? What is my tone and voice? What are my values? Am I consistent in what I believe in? Just looking at values just for 1 second, if I may, values should be our benchmark. That should be the deciding factor whether we want to do something or we don't want to do something, whether we want to work with someone or whether we don't want to work with somebody. And we need to stick by that, rather than just saying, oh, yeah, my value is blah, blah, blah. No, the question is, are you actually really living your values? Because values plays a massive role in your brand, your messaging, how you show up in the world, how it comes through your content, it comes through everything. And and I want to leave it on that note, because I think that we've misused the word value, we misuse the word authenticity, we misuse personal branding and what it actually means, and we need to be really, really serious and understand that your personal brand is nothing if it can't be commercialized. It's nothing. It's zero. It's meaningless. So you can spend $100,000 on fancy schmancy, but if you can't convert that into a commercial outcome, you've just wasted a lot of money pretending that you're famous when you're actually not famous. And you can be famous in your area of specialization. You just have to understand that there are some moving parts that need to be implemented.
I totally agree, because I think I'm in that part where I'm in sales. I've been in sales forever, right? And everybody talks about how it's different. And it's like, no, so it's always the same. Go back to the greats who talk about everything that they're talking about. That's where we've always been. The
Yes.
difference is it's in different avenues now. And it's the same way. You still talk about the hook, the education or benefit, whatever you want to call it, and then then call to action and all. It's the same in all marketing, right? It's the same on everything we do. But people want to say, look at what I just figured out. You didn't figure that out. That was told like back in 19, how old
Yep.
some of these books are. Go back to the great books and start reading them again, and you'll be shocked what you don't know. And
I agree, Ed.
yeah,
I agree.
because the biggest problem today is, I mean, with the younger generation, and I'm not knocking you because I might be close to the same age. We've been doing this for a few years. I can't tell about you. I'm just talking to me because I got gray hair. But the people today, the young generation today, have no idea. They have no soft skills. They don't have any of these skills that we were taught. They look at their phone. They don't look at people in the eye. They don't do certain things. And there's such a huge market for that, to fix that. And that what needs to get fixed. And until they can understand that, they won't be perceived as authority. They won't be perceived as anything, because they can't even get past looking at somebody in the eye and talking to them. So there's a huge need out there for this type of stuff and helping people understand their brand. Just like if you could, the same thing you did here for a person, you could do for a product, or we used to do for products. We still do, but you know what I mean? So I applaud you for. I did not know what I was going to get into by having you on my podcast. Because you never know, and I really appreciate you being on here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
And I do like what you said last. The last thing you said before I went on. How important that is. That is very important. Knowing your values and who you are, because you need to walk the walk and talk the talk, or nobody wants to deal with you.
Spot on.
All right, man. Thank you for being here today, and I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody else who's been listening today.
Thanks, Ed.